Dear students, esteemed Hertie faculty, and distinguished competition judges.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, both in the audience and online.
My name is Patrick.
And I am Greta. We are both part of the management team, and today we have the pleasure of moderating the futurEU 2023 final.
We're delighted to be here with you, in person and virtually, and we're grateful to the Hertie School for hosting us today.
And before we begin, we want to extend our warmest congratulations to all of you, especially to the finalist teams who will soon present their policy proposal.
So without further ado, we declare the futurEU competition 2023
open.
So to begin, let me quickly introduce this year's topic and the reason why we settled on it. The climate crisis is one of the most pressing issues of our time, and it requires immediate action and cohesive policy making. As a global leader, the EU has the responsibility to take the lead in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and transitioning to a renewable future. We must act now to ensure a sustainable future for generations to come. However, it is crucial to recognize the social dimension of climate change and the impact of our policy choices. We need to ensure that our actions don't aggravate existing inequalities, but rather address them in a fair and just manner. It is not just about making changes, but making them in a fair and just manner. The EU must take bold and decisive action to tackle the climate crisis and promote sustainable development. Together, we can make the difference for a brighter future.
So this morning, we've had the pleasure of hearing from 8 teams who have presented their proposals on how the EU can move forward in regards to equitable climate transformation. And we are excited to see how these proposals can contribute to shaping the future of the European Union. All of them were creative, innovative, and visionary. And for that, we would like to thank and compliment all participants that shape this year's futurEU competition. You truly are the future of Europe.
Yes. And now, we have the pleasure of welcoming Hertie School's president and distinguished professor of international political economy, Cornelia Woll. Dear Cornelia, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. My name is Cornelia Woll. I am the president of the Hertie School. I am a professor of international political economy, but my first love has always been European affairs. I've studied European affairs as a doctoral student and after, and 25 years ago, I counted in my head, 25 years ago, I did my first ever internship in the European Parliament. And at the internship, which was with the British delegation, no longer is there, was on hugely important topics, in particular whether chicken cages should be very small or a bit bigger, and whether rubber duckies, no joke, should have red beaks, which had a particular color in them that might have been of chemical composition that was bad for our health. I came out of this experience having learned a lot about Europe. I also joked that you really get a sense of the detail of regulation that you have to handle if you have the everyday work. And although I still suspect lots of rubber duckies and other questions are occupying policymakers in Brussels, I would like to say that now, 25 years after, the EU has really come to deal with much more important questions, and I dare say with the look to the war in Ukraine and with the look to the question you have in the competition today, we're now dealing with existentialist questions that are really important, and it's really important to get them right. So I am very, very happy to welcome you here to this competition, and I'm kind of concluding that it's a room full of EU enthusiasts, at least enthusiastic enough to come here to participate in this exercise, because I truly believe that the most important challenges we currently face, we can only solve if we do them together. And I also believe that the best ideas are not the ones that we've already come up with, but the ones that you may be developing in your generation and with your effort in these contexts, in these exercises, and in these communities. So I have high hopes for you, even though I realize that part of this today may be playful, part of it may be because you're just a competitive animal and you want to win. Maybe you are really passionate about some of the ideas that you put forward, but I would like to see you in 10 or 20 years from now and see how things have developed from the small idea you defended today to what may be in the future. The futurEU initiative was founded 3 years ago by master's students of the Hertie School, so we're immensely proud of this initiative and what it has become. They wanted to give a voice to young Europeans on the future of our continent and to translate what they'd learned in the classroom into concrete policy proposals, which is really one of our convictions, and I'm so happy to see this format trying to put that into action. Since the beginning, the concept and the idea was to give a European dimension to this initiative by opening it up to all of our students from the CIVICA Alliance and to allow us to gather the now 10 European universities in the social sciences in Europe together in one space, because as much as we can learn in our own settings, if we confront one another also on the areas that we disagree deeply on, we can only get out of it richer. So we're very happy that you have responded to this invitation. And this year we're also very, very happy to welcome a group of promising students from Ukraine as observers to the competition. The Ukrainian students come from 5 universities that are partnering with CIVICA, the Donetsk National University, Kiev National Economic University, the Kiev School of Economics, whose pin I'm wearing, because I've been given one now, and the National University of Kiev Mohyala Academy and the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. We're very grateful that you've made this journey, which is a long journey for you to Berlin. Thank you very much for the support also that you've received from the Warsaw School of Economics. We are very happy to see you here. We're very eager to continue seeing you here. And the Hertie School and our CIVICA partners have always stood behind Ukraine and the struggles you're going to. I hope there's a lot of more opportunities for us to connect, to exchange, and that we can bring our universities and our countries closer together. This year, participants in the futurEU competition were invited to submit proposals on how EU policy can advance climate protection and sustainability in a turbulent world. The European Parliament has just adopted a very ambitious legislation at becoming carbon neutral by 2050, and the EU is at the forefront in tackling climate change, but achieving this goal will be an immense challenge for your generation. We need to move from targets to concrete actions. We need to ensure that we stay on pace, and this will require innovative thinking and a deep knowledge of how institutions and policy making works, and that's the positive way, or sometimes get stuck. And I think you have brought all of this creativity here, and I'm really happy to see that for today's topic we are asking the big questions. I'm very much looking forward to hearing the ideas of all of the teams, and we have the finalists here today to tackle this challenge. Altogether, we had 262 students in 104 teams from 10 CIVICA universities joining the competition this year, and the competition was particularly high. I also have to say that that intensity in only 3 years of existence is very impressive. So again, what a road it has been. Students from Bocconi University, the Hertie School, the London School of Economics, and Sciences Po competed this morning in the semi-finals. And I hear we're in Italian season, and we have 2 teams from Bocconi competing for a place in the finals that you are watching tonight. So congratulations to these 2 teams. We're eager to see you on stage. I would like to thank the students of the Hertie School who managed this competition, behind the scenes, who've worked very hard for 7 months, you said? 6 months? More than half a year in making sure that this will come together and be a success. I think you've successfully done so. I'd like to single out Francesca Minotta for the entire team, but thank you so much for driving this all together. I know you're not alone, and I would really like to say it's so great to see that even during your professional year, during the time that you could be in classes elsewhere, during the time that you might be exploring even just the nice city of Berlin, you've decided to prepare a future EU competition. So thank you very much. I would also... I would also like to thank the Jacques Delors Centre, our pride on European questions, and without whom this probably would be difficult and the jury would be empty. So I'd like to thank the jury at the same time. You are the place that has become a go-to place for everybody here at the Hertie School interested in these questions. You also have a very busy schedule, so to see you go and sit through all of these ideas really is a gift to us, and thank you very much to the jury for doing this, and also to the DAD who supported the endeavor. Now with this, I'd like to close by saying good luck to the finalists. May the Italian team win, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for that speech, Cornelia. I believe you're completely right. The devil's in the detail, oftentimes, and whether that is in rubber ducks and their red noses, or in the big ideas of climate change and ensuring equitable climate change transition, these things need to be discussed and need to be acted upon together, so that's why we're here. And so now to the juicy stuff. I would like to invite the first finalist team on stage. Team 17, I would like to ask Aimant and François from Bocconi University with a proposal, The Climate Divide, why the EU Borders Adjustment Mechanism needs rethinking for developing countries. The stage is yours.
Before that, sorry, just a quick reminder of the rules for our finalists.
Please, go ahead.
Sorry. Just wanted to remind you, you have 12 minutes for your presentation. After 10 minutes, Camille, who is sitting there, will raise a yellow card. When the time is finished, she will raise a red card. When she raises the red card, you have to stop, whatever happens. So if you didn't finish your presentation, the judges will ask you questions. The audience, both here or online, can ask you questions. We really like you to stop when you see the red card. And now the floor is yours, officially.
CBAM is a mechanism that was developed with very little interaction with developing countries. Their interests play a very little role in the CBAM and its design. Dear futurEU jury committee, dear audience, it's an honor to be here for the finals. My name is François Braun.
And I'm Iman.
Today we're going to talk about the climate divide and why the EU's border adjustment mechanism needs rethinking for developing countries. The proposal for the carbon border adjustment mechanism was put forward by the European Commission in July 2021, and the CBAM is a unique tariff that imposes a carbon price on energy-intensive imported goods that is equivalent to that imposed on domestic goods in the EU through the emissions trading scheme. The urgency of this matter is evident. 2 days ago, the European Parliament adopted the CBAM, and already in October this year, it's set to end in its transitional phase. At first sight, the objectives of the CBAM seem promising. First, to level the playing field between European companies and importers and to avoid carbon leakage. That is the practice of European carbon-intensive companies relocating outside the European Union to avoid carbon pricing. Second, the objective would be to incentivize climate mitigation abroad through carbon pricing.
While these are certainly very important objectives, there is one glaring problem with the CBAM, which is precisely that it is not inclusive enough. The projected impact of the CBAM on developing versus developed countries is vastly disproportional. As you can see on this graph here, with a CBAM of $44 per ton of carbon, developing countries will actually witness a decrease in income levels of $6 billion, while developed countries witness an increase in income levels of $2.5 billion. These findings should raise significant cause for concern. But why exactly are developing countries so badly affected? Well, simply put, because of their economic structures. Firstly, developing countries tend to have more carbon-intensive production methods than developed countries do, which means that they will face a higher tariffs on the same goods. Secondly, developing countries tend to be more vulnerable to the CBAM because of the fact that they have a less diversified export structure, which makes it harder for them to switch away from the target sectors of the CBAM. Finally, developing countries have higher exposure to the CBAM due to their asymmetric trade relations with the EU, which essentially makes it harder for them to switch away to other trading partners for the CBAM. But let's put these findings into a more real-world scenario, right? Let's take the case of Mozambique. Mozambique is among the 46 least developed countries in the world. Not only that, it was the fifth most climate vulnerable country from 2000 to 2019, despite having contributed negligibly to global emissions. Finally, Mozambique is the country that is set to be most impacted by the CBAM, with both the highest level of vulnerability and the highest level of exposure to the CBAM from all the countries in the world. Unfortunately, Mozambique is not alone. There are many developing countries out there, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, that have high levels of exposure and vulnerability to this tariff. To expect these countries that have contributed negligibly to the climate crisis to pay the same tariff as far more advanced economies is quite simply unfair.
However, it's not just developing countries that stand to lose. Indeed, the EU may really shoot itself in the foot here. First, because the CBAM targets countries that lie in regions of geostrategic importance for the EU. That means that with the CBAM, the EU's long-term soft power, for instance, in the Middle East, but also North Africa, is at stake. Second, the CBAM could undermine the EU's climate mitigation leadership internationally that it's demonstrated, for instance, at the last conference of the parties. With the CBAM, the EU's credibility internationally is also at stake. And finally, the CBAM targets countries that currently benefit from the EU's special trade treatment. That is, with the CBAM, the EU's development agenda too is at stake. Now, to measure the efficacy of the solutions, we came up with 3 criteria. First, responsibility measured by the historical contributions to global emissions. This rule stems from the common but differentiated responsibilities principle of the United Nations and also from the WTO's principle of special and differential treatment. The second rule is capability, that is the ability to pay for mitigation. Any CBAM policy should reflect the targeted country's development status and preserve the country's right to development. And finally, mitigation impact. The idea that any CBAM policy should not undermine decarbonization efforts or even increase the risk for carbon leakage. According to these rules, our assessment is quite clear. The CBAM needs supplementary measures. First of all, because LDCs and SIDS are disproportionately affected in their welfare and development. And second of all, because this very disproportionate effect may further exacerbate global inequalities.
So how do we strive towards a CBAM that meets its own policy objectives while also being inclusive? We recommend a 3-pronged approach. Firstly, to grant exemptions to least developed countries and small island developing states from the CBAM. Secondly, to determine the exact nature of these exemptions after dialogue with these countries, to take into account their concerns. Finally, to channel the revenues raised from this tariff into climate financing and to fund the low-carbon transition in these countries. Now, we recognize that while these policy solutions meet our first 2 criteria of responsibility and capability, it may put at risk the third criterion, which is mitigation impact. It could be argued that by granting exemptions to these countries, you raise not only the risk of carbon leakage in the EU, but also you disincentivize these countries from decarbonizing. How do we address these concerns? Well, firstly, we recommend that for exemptions, the EU implement rule of origins regulations, which ensure that other countries don't channel their goods to these exempted countries and then not face the tariff. And secondly, we recommend that safeguards be put into place that would kick in the event that, for example, a direct link can be established between these exemptions and an increased carbon leakage in the EU. As for the risk of disincentivizing developing world countries from decarbonizing, we believe that our third policy solution is sufficient to meet this because the revenues would be channeled for the specific purpose of helping these countries to decarbonize and move towards cleaner technologies.
So how can we operationalize our proposals? As for exemptions, we believe that these would only add consistency, coherency to the EU's already existing development agenda, because LDCs in lower to middle income countries are already benefiting from a legal framework of positive discrimination. For example, with the Everything But Arms scheme, but also with the EU's generalized scheme of preferences. More specifically, we recommend a blanket exemption to LDCs that fall under the Everything But Arms scheme, which is an existing special arrangement that provides them with duty-free and quota-free access to the EU markets for all products except arms and ammunition. For small island developing states that are currently benefiting from existing trade agreements with the EU, they shall receive a full or partial exemption that is in line with the agreements that have already been concluded with the EU. For example, since January 2008, Fiji, SIDS, has already duty-free and quota-free access to the EU market. Finally, if none of these criteria should be met, we recommend assessing the level of exemptions based on the income level, based on greenhouse gas emissions, and on climate vulnerability. Then, continuing with dialogue while establishing the design, the Commission can use the Global Climate Change Alliance Plus as a forum to discuss with LDCs and SIDS and build on their capacity to implement and sustain the CBAM. And finally, as for climate financing, the European Parliament has already advocated for specialized treatment for developing countries and has already indicated the funds raised should be directed towards climate financing, for example, through funds of the European Green Deal. These funds should at least be equivalent to the revenue of the CBAM, deducting the administrative cost of such policy. Researchers have argued for funds allocated for a specific policy of mitigation strategies to assist LDCs and SIDS in transforming their industries towards carbon neutrality. Priority in this sense should of course be given to CBAM-affected sectors. Now, how can we incentivize these countries? In order to receive financing, we propose a CBAM exemption conditionality mechanism, upon which exemptions are granted based on the country's commitment to decarbonizing. Should these criteria not be met, we do not recommend fully removing the exemption, but much rather provide funding to decarbonization projects with loans rather than for grants and at concessional rates.
Now, I'll be talking about the legal basis for these solutions that we put forth. Now, we recognize that because of the fact that the CBAM is still pretty much in the adoption phase, it's very difficult to know what the Commission has the power to do and not to do, also because the texts of the proposals are not made available to the public. Given that, we've taken a closer look at the legal basis for our solutions and tried to map out several routes for their implementation. So based on the draft proposal that the European Commission submitted on the CBAM in June 2021, on the specific issue of the price of the CBAM, and I quote here, the Commission shall adopt implementing acts concerning the calculation of the price and any further arrangement connected with it. We believe that exemptions, given that they would indeed either be a full or partial reduction in the price, would be provided for under this provision. When it comes to directing the revenue towards climate financing, however, it is important to note that the original proposal of the Commission specified that the revenues should be diverted towards the general budget of the EU. We very much doubt that this will stay the same because the European Parliament has stated that, and I quote again, those new revenues should allow for an increase in the EU's contribution to international climate finance in favor of LDCs and small island developing states. If the adopted proposal does not reflect this, which again we doubt, but it does have the legal basis for a delegated act, we recommend the original route of going through a comitology committee. Otherwise, we would recommend that the Commission submit an amended proposal following a formal legislative procedure.
Now concluding, we firmly believe that an inclusive CBAM will equip the EU with the necessary political and diplomatic capital to accelerate climate mitigation and climate efforts internationally, and will place it at the forefront in the international fight against climate change. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I now invite the judges to ask their questions.
Happy to start. Thanks a lot for the great presentation. I would have a question on whether we can have the cake and eat it too. So I would like to highlight the importance of keeping the integrity of tools like CBAM and the ETS intact. And so you're suggesting an exemption, and I'm wondering whether that's really necessary to achieve the goals that we have in mind. And so here in this case, I mean, the CBAM is not going to be active for another few years, right? And perhaps in Mozambique, the ownership structure of the aluminium industry is such that they actually do have access to capital. That I'm not so sure. But my question to you would be, if we actually really need the exemption to decarbonize in Mozambique, or whether we can use the other, especially Pillar 3 that you have, and focus more on Pillar 3, help Mozambique with access to capital, and then keep the CBAM integrity intact.
I would perhaps reverse it as well. You can't have the cake and eat it too for the EU in this sense, in this very sense. The EU can't impose a CBAM and then still expect to be a climate leader and accept it internationally. I think that the research has been quite clear that without exemptions, and many research papers argue for that, without exemptions that you would have serious income effects on these countries.
Right, so the purpose of the exemptions, the primary purpose is not to somewhat finance the climate transition in these countries, but actually to prevent the negative welfare effects that we witness in these countries as a result of the CBAM. So there's a lot of research that shows that because of the CBAM, income levels will go down in these countries, and because of that, exports will decrease in developing countries in favor of developed countries, which we believe is, at its very core, not right, not just, especially given the historical responsibility of the climate crisis and where it lies.
Before my colleagues come in, I just have a question on the more technical side. You showed that it's going to be 6 billion of income reduction in developed countries. Is that going to be over the full time horizon of CBAM or just annual figures? Because 6 billion, given the size of the investment needed for decarbonization, for instance, also future or expected CBAM revenues, doesn't seem to be very big.
If I may reply to that, so the expected revenues from the CBAM, the Commission has calculated them in 2021, and they should be between 1.5, I think, and 3 billion euros. So we see that just, if all the revenues from the CBAM were redirected towards developing countries, they could not even offset the income effects, the negative income effects, which are at minus 6 billion. So the math doesn't add up, I believe, and this clearly shows that exemptions are necessary.
Thank you so much for your presentation and also for addressing some of our previous comments. I made the comment in the last round regarding Article 290 and comitology. I am still not sure I understand your approach here. Can you explain to me again how you intend to use Article 290 in this case, why a delegated act is possible, and what you mean by if a delegated act cannot be implemented, the Commission should submit an amendment? Which legislative procedure applies here, and can the Commission submit an amendment in the procedure that applies?
Right, so regarding the use of a delegated act, we're actually, because of the fact that the CBAM proposals that have been adopted so far are not available, we're actually uncertain of whether or not we can use a delegated act to change this, which is why we've provided two sort of routes to do this, right? If there is a provision for a delegated act, we would love to follow that route and just have the Commission supplement the adopted proposal. If not, what we mean by amendment proposal is an entirely new proposal that would include these amendments that we're talking about.
But of course, there is a preference, right? The CBAM is already entering its transitional phase in October. So the fastest way would, of course, be through Article 290. This is why we put both options.
But did you look into when Article 290 can be used? What are the preconditions for it to apply?
For it to be mentioned within the parent act of the CBAM, right? But the uncertainty here is that we don't have access to that parent act. It's not available to the public.
But we do see that, of course, the Commission has been looking at implementing in delegated acts, right? We see that, for instance, with the proposal of the exemptions. Regarding these technicalities, and this is what really our primary research with Professor Lucas Taschini has given, is that a lot of things discussed in the Parliament will be on the general principles and the general outline of the CBAM. Let's say, the details of the financing will not necessarily be included in the discussions in the Parliament. And I believe that that was the point he most stressed, the uncertainty of the CBAM and how it will actually look like for developing countries. That was really the most striking point.
Thanks a lot for this presentation, and also I think it's a really timely and interesting topic you pick up. And I mean, these are the big questions of our world. How do we redistribute between countries, and how can we actually make sure that if we want to foster decarbonization, that we can actually do it across the globe? I have a question on the pillar you talked about the least, which is the dialogue pillar. And I would just like to get a bit more an idea about how you think about this pillar. So is the idea that this pillar is merely informing the other two pillars? So is the idea to have like dialogues to understand when and why we actually want and need exemptions in different countries and different sectors? And also the same for financing. Is it really about understanding how could we, or how could, or when it is important to actually, or when should grants or loans be attributed to specific projects? So is it really the idea to informing the other two steps, or is it the pillar by itself? And if so, what does it do?
I believe that this can't be answered in a binary way. It's certainly both. We have seen that for the EU, a lot of diplomatic capital is at stake because, for instance, with the loss and damage fund, the EU has been a key negotiator into advancing that at the last conference of the parties. And of course, by establishing a dialogue mechanism, you will achieve more acceptance of the CBAM in countries that will not be able to be exempted. Because, of course, we are here talking about LDCs and SIDS, but this does not cover the entirety of, let's say, the anger that has been discussed with the CBAM.
Right, and with regards to the dialogue, we specifically would like to use the GCCA Plus platform to determine how the exemptions in the financing would indeed pan out, because of the fact that this platform has been focused specifically on SIDS and LDCs, and how the EU can sort of aid climate policy and climate action in these countries. So we believe that it's kind of perfectly in line with our other recommendations, which is why it's both supplementary and, as Francois said, a kind of pillar of its own.
No. Oh, yeah, no, it's working. There we have one question.
Hi, thanks for your wonderful efforts here. My question is more about your policy solution, which you propose to have an exemption for these developing countries. Have you also put in mind the estimated cost for such exemptions for developing countries? And it will be also good if you could show us a little bit of light on what's the market size of this carbon-intensive market that you're talking about. Thank you.
With regards to the cost of exempting these countries, we looked at some research from Perdana and Viel, which basically argues that implementing exemptions for these countries is affordable for the EU, also because it doesn't necessarily represent a cost for the EU. You see, this is an entirely new tariff. It would bring in actually a new source of revenue and not necessarily impose any cost on the EU, but by exempting them from it. Could you repeat your second question?
I want to understand what's the market size for this carbon-intensive products that come into EU.
I think our question was less about the market size than the asymmetric relations that we have between the two blocks, let's say LDCs and the EU on the other hand. The idea that the EU does not depend at all from the production of least developed countries, but the other way around, as we explain with our graphs on exposure and vulnerability, is much stronger, and that is where the inequality, the asymmetry lies.
Also, with regards to the market size, if I may, so the price of the CBAM tariff has yet to be set, but according to the Commission's earliest estimates, which were 2 years ago, so we're not, the CBAM should bring in about 1.5 billion to 3 billion euros in revenues. So that would be like a rough estimate of it, but obviously this depends on the final price that's negotiated.
Is there a second question in the room? Otherwise, we would give the floor to the online questions. Maybe online and then Amber. It should. Now it's on again, but I switched it off.
Now it's working. So we got 2 questions online, and they are short questions, so I will ask the 2, and you decide how you answer. So the first one is, what to do with China? Do you think your measures would make the CBAM more or less compliant with WTO rules? And the other would be, what would you argue to a country that to concentrate UE efforts on climate change locally, so to solve energy issues on its continent first.
Could you repeat the first question? I'm not sure I understood correctly.
So the complete question would be, exemptions bear an important political problem. What to do with China? Do you think your measures would make the CBAM more or less compliant with WTO rules?
Well, with regards to China, at least, it's not really part of our policy solutions. China is not a least developed country or a small island developing state, so it would not benefit from exemptions or financing for that matter. With regards to WTO compliance, there are actually significant questions about whether the CBAM is WTO compliant. And I personally attended a talk in which a WTO expert quite literally said that he doubts very much that it is. So to give climate financing to these countries is actually seen as a way of improving the WTO compliance of this policy. As for the second one.
Okay, I will read it again. What would you argue to a country that wishes to concentrate European Union efforts on climate change locally? So to solve energy issues on EU first and then worry about outside. I kind of improved the wording, but it's that.
We don't think there's necessarily one or the other, right? Like if we give these countries exemptions, their research shows that it's actually because these countries are importing so little into the EU relatively, that there's gonna be actually a very little effect on carbon leakage. So we don't necessarily think that this threatens EU companies necessarily, or threatens the EU's energy policy or the EU's domestic issues. In fact, we would argue that it actually helps the EU in terms of its political and diplomatic power, as Francois has already mentioned.
Okay, I think both are. Thank you. So nothing in the EU usually happens, nothing is in a bubble, right? So different proposal and legislation pieces often affect each other. I was wondering, what do you think this type of policy and amendment would have on other green packages?
Could you perhaps be a bit more specific on that? Like which green packages, or like if you have a specific relationship in mind?
It doesn't have to be specific, but if you take the Fit for 55 packages or different types of trading markets, do you think that developing countries should be also considered in them? Are of exemptions something that the EU should be careful about implementing as a precedent?
Yeah, so absolutely. Like when it comes to the recommendations that we were making, we tried very hard to find the solutions that would kind of integrate into the EU's existing solutions for not just climate financing, but like we mentioned, like the existing preferential access treatments of the EU and which countries it grants them to, which is why we specifically chose LDCs and SIDS, also because it fits at the end of the day, not just into the EU's institutional framework, but also a multilateral framework, right? With the WTO, with the UN's guidelines on LDCs and how these countries should be treated when it comes to trade treaties and on implementing tariffs and giving them preferential access, essentially, to allow them to develop sustainably and to give them the necessary financing, also as seen at the last COP. And so we believe that these solutions definitely fit into the EU's existing institutional framework, but more than that, also an international framework.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Anyone? Ado? That thing? Thank you.
Thank you so much for presenting your proposal. We can now continue with our second and last team. So we have Giacomo, Luca and Martino from Bocconi University with their proposal Saving the Planet on a Friday Off, the 4-day work week as a tool of EU climate policy. So you can come to the stage and I'll hand you the 2 mics.
Good evening, everybody. We are Team 41, and thank you for the opportunity of being here. We are here to present you our policy brief called Saving the Planet on a Friday Off, the 4-day work week as a tool for EU climate policy. The recent war in Ukraine brought the focus of energy action toward decreasing energy consumption, but policies aimed at compressing energy demand are highly unpopular, especially between the working class, rural inhabitants and commuters. The 4-day work week would be a policy that allows us to have consistent savings in energy without reducing anybody's welfare. Actually, we are here to show you that it could have positive effects for everybody's well-being. So, why the 4-day work week? First, environmental benefits, which are almost straightforward. Offices would stay closed 1 more day, and workers wouldn't have to go to work. This would bring substantial savings in energy in corporate buildings and reducing pollution by commuting. Actually, some estimates of national effect of a 20% working hour reduction range from a 10.5% in energy uses by CUT in 2021 to a staggering 24% reduction in emission by XALA in 2020. Importantly, in infrastructurally disadvantaged territories is where commuting is more costly and harmful, so these are the territories that would have most to gain for such a policy. We know that there could be some problems with what the people do on their newly acquired Friday off, because they could hop on the first plane and therefore emitting more than working. But we think this is not the case. Why? Because we live in a growing environmental common consciousness, and evidence shows that people are more and more mindful of their sustainable habits and of their ecological footprint. Furthermore, direct estimates of the beneficial effects of working less, so having more free time, show that people would lead more sustainable behaviors, and people would mostly fill their longer weekends with low emission activities such as volunteering or staying with their family or cooking. The main point is this more free time would allow us to take ownership of our consumption choices and capitalize on the gains that such a sustainable mindset could bring. One question that the judges made us was, would a one-day mandatory remote working policy have the same effects? We think they would be similar by the environmental side, especially in commuting, even if some estimates of saving in commuting emissions are at 10% for 4 days mandatory remote days. But we will still have considerable work-related emissions, for example, servers, databases, or Zoom calls. Furthermore, we don't think these policies are mutually exclusive, but actually we are in favor of any policy that adds flexibility to the workspace and can have environmental benefits. But we are sure that remote working lacks one important benefit, which Martino will explain you.
Yeah, indeed. In some cases, indeed, remote work does not decrease stress levels and, in general, workers' well-being, as the 4 days work week has been evidenced to consistently and effectively do, indeed, decreasing anxiety and improving to a healthier work-life balance the life of their employees. Indeed, the pandemic put us in front of an historical shift of our labor markets. Workers' demands are now shifting, no more willing to put work needs in front of their life needs. Indeed, they are now requiring more flexible job arrangements, but also jobs that are more mindful of their own mental health and would also consider the needs that they have to spend time off the office. All these requests came to fuel what we know as the Great Resignation phenomenon, with people voicing the alarming situation you can observe from these two graphs. And by the way, I'm sorry, the file here is corrupted. The colors shouldn't be like this, so I'm gonna also explain you the graphs here. Indeed, the burnout graph, which is on the left, depicts the box plot of close to burnout situation in terms of percentages of employees experiences such emotional distress once during their whole working life. And as you can see here, the box plot is quite tight, and the median is above 50%. That is 1/2 of our European employees experience such huge emotional distress in their working life. Also, the rightward graph depicts another worrisome situation, being the map of stressed individuals, stressed workers, the day prior to the survey administration, which averages around 35% as a whole in Europe, but reaches peaks as high as 64% in Turkey. Therefore, the 4 days work week responds strongly to these new demands, new requests of a shifted working culture. Indeed, trials have been reported to be successful, with participants reporting less stress, fatigue, anxiety, and burnout levels with respect to their comparison period. More than that, it also not only increases their well-being from the emotional point of view, but also it lightens the work-family conflict, allowing employees to stay longer in their family, achieving a higher harmony between work and family, and more even sharing of domestic responsibilities and homework within the household, thus achieving a paramount condition to the shrinkage of any gender gap.
So why haven't we done it already? The problem is that implementing such programs is very hardly economically sustainable. There is one takeaway here, and that's it, that's productivity has to increase. And it's very simple to see why. If we keep productivity fixed and just work less, we're going to produce less and in the end consume less, which is nothing else than a recession. The only way we can afford working less without reducing our consumption levels is if we increase our hourly productivity. And this is not easy, not easy for every firm, especially since this is not a technological improvement that simply makes production more efficient. This is a purely organizational reform that requires pure organizational change to work. Every firm is different with respect to their organizational structure, and every firm must find their own path to reorganize their own production. There is no one-stop shop for productivity growth. And it turns out that some firms are better equipped than others. Smaller and knowledge-intensive firms are usually better at changing with respect to the changing environment. They're more flexible with respect to their organization than big and stratified companies. So how are companies doing? I'm sorry about the PowerPoint, it's all corrupted. Turns out they're doing great. Firms involved in the UK trial reported 35% stronger revenue growth with respect to a comparison period, which becomes 37% in the US and Ireland, while Microsoft Japan reported a staggering 40% increase in hourly productivity. Still, we cannot know if others would do the same. The problem is that firms self-select into trials, meaning that the best equipped firms are way overrepresented in the trials population. The only way we can know if this will work on a wider range of firms is having bigger trials, more trials, and specifically trials that target firms that would not themselves choose to participate. That's why we call European members of Parliament to propose a continental trial of the 4-day work week with the following characteristics. The trial we have in mind will be sponsored by the EU Commission to make use of their considerable guidance and knowledge-sharing capabilities. It will provide crucial financial insurance against productivity losses to induce reluctant firms to participate. It will target multinational corporations, which are usually big and stratified. It will be diffused throughout the internal market as to plant the seed of sustainable working hours reductions across member states, and it will be targeting infrastructurally disadvantaged areas, which we saw are the ones that have the most to gain from such a policy. Now some details and some answers to feedback from our judges. The trial we have in mind has no firm mandatory inclusion, because the EU is in no position to force firms to enter such trials, which makes it necessary to have a strong informational campaign to both firms and employees alike to have a high participation rate to such trials. We also envision no possibility of employees opt-out, both for organizational reasons and because we run the risk of creating dangerous processes of hostile culture and peer pressure between those that agree and those who do not participate in the project. The sample will have to be the most representative, the closest possible to the actual economy. Some dimensions we've thought about are size, both economic and occupational, the sector and industry. It needs to be representative for countries and for regional composition, especially with respect to in the infrastructural stock. If not, we're willing to run another informational campaign targeted towards the missing categories. For financial insurance, so financing, we already said before, it would be from the European Social Fund Plus and from the Fund for Regional Development. But the point, to insure against productivity losses, we need to measure productivity. And measuring productivity is kind of a Pandora box. There's a myriad of possible measurement. The general idea is that you need a measure of output and a measure of inputs. So you can have revenue over hours or revenues over a mix of capital and labor. Differs from sector and it is also can be firm specific. So after choosing one or more measures, the idea of the selection and the trial is to construct it as if it were a diff and diff. So having a treatment and a control group, monitoring them in a normal period with 5 days working weeks, and then giving the 4-day working week to one group only, and seeing what happens. This lets us eliminate both individual firm heterogeneity and the effects of market conditions and common time trends, and retrieve the true treatment effect. So to wrap up, we believe the 4 days working week is at the crossroad of 3 historical challenges of our time. The first is achieving our climate goals through substantial emissions reduction. The second is bridging the divide between popular and working classes and climate policies. And the third is finally shaping a labor market that prioritizes workers' well-being. Thank you very much. We're open to questions.
Yeah, thank you very much for your very creative and interesting presentation. I think you presented it very well, and I really like that you have this sort of consensual approach, trying to find or present an idea that gets everyone aboard for climate policy. My question and the concern I have about your idea is that you focus a lot on firms in your presentation, but maybe less so on the people. And the question that I have is, how would you consider, some people that depend on a full-time job or even have 2 jobs to get along? How can they benefit from this scheme? Is there any kind of compensation mechanism that you can think of in trying to make this as inclusive as you present it to be? Thank you.
Well, one first point is that increasing productivity and keeping total monthly productivity the same, wages would stay the same, so it wouldn't be a problem for people to work less if this is the case. And furthermore, we've seen recent polls which see employees quite enthusiastic about this, with some latest data by Adecco that a couple of months ago showed a 70% positive view by employees in all of the world.
And yeah, in addition to this, is it working? Okay. In addition to this, for sure, expanding the project to most firms as we can effectively broadens the frame of employees that can be possibly affected by this policy. But in the end, there will always be some workers that will have to work full-time. I'm talking about also essential workers, which we discovered the importance during the pandemic even more. It is less likely they will manage to go there in the future. So I think that if the 4-day working week will become something slightly diffused in some sectors, some compensation mechanism towards sectors that are not able to effectively implement it would be a rather good idea.
If I may, the point is also this, that we need a trial to discover which are the sectors that are more fitted to implement this such reform and which are not, and then, of course, to think about a compensation mechanism for those sectors. Because by now, due to the self-selection criterion, we don't know that.
Thank you so much. I really like this idea, and I fully agree with Lucas that it's very nice that you try to have this holistic approach about it. My question is a bit on the long-term plans that you have with this proposal. What is the scale of these trials in the EU? How big are they? And how do we move from this trial to a long-term solution in this regard? Because now you're suggesting that the EU budget, EU funds are supposed to compensate the firms, or at least in the trial run, but the EU budget is not going to be able to, I imagine, to support firms on a very large scale indefinitely. So how do we move from this trial run where firms are being compensated to a long-term approach?
I can start from the second point. I'm sorry, just a second. First of all, the trial is needed to see if productivity gains are possible, and if productivity gains do materialize, no compensation to firms is in place. So hopefully the expense for European funds will be as little as possible. What we hope for is that it works in as many sectors as it is sufficient to create some competition, some positive competition to get workers. So if it's true, as we believe it is, that working culture is shifting and has shifted towards giving more prominence to work-life balance and to life needs, we believe that in the future firms, it will be possible that firms do compete to attract workers on the base of working conditions. If this works, we hope that firms that offer 4-day workweek programs will compete against others and will win workers from other firms.
Yeah, at the same time, it's also essential to keep in the trial a wide scale, so to tackle all the possible conditions that are in the European internal market. So we are interested to understand whether this plan, this organizational arrangement is feasible in all the countries and across all sectors. And by now, the evidence we got is that it's so in the great majority of the cases. So productivity downsides are no presence, and so even the insurance mechanism, as Luca was suggesting, it should just compensate a tiny portion of that.
And to add just one point, of course, if we see that it just works in specific sector, then those sectors might decide to go toward that direction by themselves. And actually, from the largest trials by date, a very large majority of the firms decided to keep this policy in place after the end of the trial. But in the end, this is what the trial is for.
Thanks a lot for the very insightful presentation. My question is more regarding the connection you made to the reduction of GHG emissions on a Friday, so that it's a bit speculative, or you're relying mainly on the changing mindset of the population right now, that they wouldn't travel more during these 3 days, especially if you say not all sectors could implement the 4-day week. It might be especially digital or rather well-paid jobs or well-paying industries who could implement this and then travel more. Have you any data on that, maybe?
So first of all, the bulk of environmental benefits come from office closures and avoiding commuting on a day. The behavior of people on the extra day off and the possibility it may go wrong or right on an environmental standpoint is a behavioral channel that is above and beyond the center of environmental gains, which is closure. On that aspect, the evidence we found, which is related to trials and it's also specific to those kind of firms, found instead that people tend to spend the extra day off engaging in low carbon activities. So we cannot be sure that will be the case with other sectors and with other firms, but we think that is very hopeful evidence on the fact that the plane on Friday to do the weekend trip that is highly polluting will not be as prevalent as one might think. And so that behavioral channel will add on the environmental gains from office closures and avoiding commuting and not subtract from them.
To the point 3 of the references which we showed in the environmental gains slide came from directly measuring working, so how much more emission at the global level. The one before this. Okay. Are linked to directly working hours. So I guess that this we can consider it already included in these references.
If I may add something. So this data is on national effects of a 20% working hours reduction. So it's most of these studies take state level, in the US state level working hours averages, and they correlate those with greenhouse gas emission or the different variable that they use. The organizers of the UK trial tried to monitor environmental gains more directly, and they had extremely hopeful conclusions. They were in the range of 25% of greenhouse gas emission. They even went on to say that if the whole UK economy shifted to 4-day work week, it would be the same as eliminating the entire car fleet of the country. But that was not scientific paper, so we prefer not to include that. The trial we're proposing is also needed to more carefully monitor firm level and personal level, if possible, environmental impact than in a more precise way than these studies do.
Yeah, and also the participants in the trial we showed are mostly coming from knowledge-intensive sectors. So also, let's say, the high socioeconomic status of our societies, people with high socioeconomic status. So, which would also be the ones more likely to hop on a plane. And since they engaged in, the evidence we found, reported that they not engaged in these more polluting behaviors, there's also hope that, broadening the trials to also different sectors in other, let's say, populated by also different type of workers, should not increase even more these percentages of, in a behavioral way, Thank you.
Thanks a lot again for presenting it again. I really like this non-normative approach to saying that there's some kind of an interesting policy idea, and we see that the evidence up to now seems like that this could have positive effects across different dimensions of society. Let's test that on a larger scale. But my question touches a bit up on what Tu was asking. What is the plan afterwards? So assuming that the trial was successful, is the idea that you hope that the firms and also the employees of the firms enjoyed that so much that they would simply stick to a 4 days work week? Or is the aim to have some legislation to actually change the working hour regulation in countries or even at the European level? So do you have some kind of vision what the ideal outcome would be for you?
Yeah, if I may start. Actually, as we mentioned, most of the participants in trials stick with this organizational arrangement because they found they increased their productivity and revenue was growing. So from the employer side, it was just a plus. From the employees side, everybody was happier, kinda. I mean, the majority, and as we said, also with the well-being data. As let's say a wide-scale approach in the long term, we would, as mentioned before, also foresee a cascade effect. So if these firms actually implementing this type of organizational arrangement are having positive feedbacks, positive outcomes out of this, and are behaving as the ones that we observe that have self-selected into the current trials and so sticking with this plan, then also others would follow to not compete with this organizational arrangement that should and is attracting people right now because people are requesting more flexible arrangement to work with.
In addition to that, with respect to possible future legislation, labor legislation on hours of work, I think it is very early to be able to say that because the trials are so limited to firms that want to do them. The point is that I personally believe that the risk of scarce productivity growth in some sectors would be high. This is not the right slide. So legislation would be advisable, in our opinion, only if not only our trial, but in wider swaths of our economy, the 4-day work week is implemented successfully in a future. Even there will, I believe that there will be some sectors that will not be able to shift, and so a prospective legislation that forces employers to, forces firms to work on a 4-day week basis will need to have some exemptions for them. In general, I believe we should be careful with working hours reductions legislated at the national level and of course at the European level until now, because we're not sure. The risks are high, the stakes are high, let's put it that way.
And this would, to be politically and socially accepted, this would probably need a cultural shift which could continue since the Great Resignation. So we might go into that direction and it could make it easier.
Questions? Are there questions from the audience, both here and online?
But maybe looking at the time, we have one question from the audience and one question online, and you don't have to answer as long as you did so.
Sorry.
Yeah. Hard to decide.
Thank you very much. I really like this idea, and I'm very happy to see that there is already research proving that it is effective. I believe that work time reduction is also central to politicians and academics who talk about degrowth. And I would say they would argue that when there is a planned reduction of demand, it's not the same as a recession. They would also argue that it might be the only way to actually reduce our carbon footprint fast enough. It would allow to maybe not focus so much on productivity gain and extend your policy to very polluting sectors such as cemeteries, paper, steel, and so on. And so I'm sure you've run into this literature, and I was wondering why you decided to put such emphasis, to put such emphasis on productivity gains.
So personally, and now I'm getting out of evidence and entering the realm of ideology, I am not a fan of degrowth. I don't think it's economically and socially sustainable. I think that the amount of redistribution it would take to sustainably degrow, so degrow without making the poor poorer, is far from our political possibilities. For me, degrowth would be sustainable if we found a way to not make the poor poorer, which I don't see. I'll be very grateful to talk to you about this.
Anyway, the point is that our idea was probably ambitious enough. And
yeah, so I think we have time for one more question from virtual room.
Okay. I will ask one of the online questions, choosing the... Okay. European economy is mostly based on small and medium enterprises. How would these actually achieve productivity increase?
Not being the owner of a small medium enterprise, I cannot be sure about the answer. But the point is, participants in trials have found that most of the productivity gains come from reduction in dead times. So times between meetings, emails, stuff that could be cut out if you thought about it, if the firm actively thought about reducing wasted time. I think those problems might be also afflicting small and medium enterprises throughout Europe, and they would be able to exploit some of that advantages, some of those gains.
Yeah. I think even though there are a lot of questions still in the room, I think we ask you a lot of questions and your time for answers is already up. So with that, thank you very much. And for everyone who still wants to ask a question, maybe you can ask them at the reception.
So thank you to Team 17 for the innovative and new policy solution, and Team 41 for their creative and comprehensive policy idea. We appreciate all the hard work that has gone into writing these policy briefs, thinking them through, and also the research that went into it. So thank you for this. Now I would like to take a brief moment to thank the judges that have been present here. I will start from the left to the right. Lukas Rasche has been here, Toon Jung, Yannick Jansen, Lukas Jerk, Lisa Bobsian, and Philipp Jäger. This competition would have not been possible without you and with the support of the Jacques Delors Centre. So we're deeply grateful for the time and also the thoughts and also the very thought-provoking questions that were asked. Now the competition is depending on you. Yes, absolutely, please. Yeah. So now the competition is depending on you. I will hand you over to the good care of Kira, who will show you into the judges' consultation room. You will have 25 minutes to consult about the two policy proposals that were just presented. And after that, we'll reconvene here and have a bit of ceremony, thanking, and also the announcement of the winner, which we all have been waiting for. I have a little disclaimer, it's going to be in Italian.
While for the others, like the judges can obviously go and deliberate. And so while we wait for the judges to deliberate, we still have something prepared for you, still something organized. As President Wall has already hinted before, this year we have a, let's call it a new feature, a feature of futurEU, that is the Observer Track. So through the generous support of NAWA and the SGH Warsaw School of Economics, a selected group of Ukrainian students are participating in the competition as observers. These students come from all over Ukraine and found their way to Berlin today to participate in the future of the European Union with us. So the Observer Track brings a fresh perspective and a more diverse discussion to the futurEU competition.
So this is why we want to take the moment to thank all of you for being here today. And as our president said in the beginning, we stand behind Ukraine. And I hope that there will be many more opportunities now and in the future to come together, perhaps here in Berlin and hopefully soon again in Ukraine. With these words, I would like to invite Dania, Anastasia, and Solomia onto the stage to give a presentation that was prepared in the name of all observers. The floor is yours.
It's working. All right. Good evening to everyone here. Maybe, again, some of you wondered who we are in this competition. As you already know, we represent students from 5 Ukrainian universities: Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, Vasil Stus Donetsk National University, Kyiv School of Economics, Ukrainian Catholic University, and Kyiv National Economic University. Our research fields include social and political science, international economics, public policy and governance. More than a year ago, the Russian full-scale invasion of our country began. Nevertheless, more than a year later, we are standing here and are able to talk on the topic of climate change, which was significantly actualized in our home country due to the war.
This ongoing war has been having devastating consequences, not just for Ukraine, but for the entire world, particularly in terms of its impact on the environment. This project offered students the chance to confront the consequences of human activities on the ecosystem, and as young Ukrainian representatives with a strong civic stance, it is crucial for us to broaden our perspectives and exchange ideas with European peers. While Ukraine is yet to join the European Union, we are grateful for the futurEU team for affording us the opportunity to participate as observers and attend all lectures on equal terms with other students. The observer track became a selection of students who share a determination to change the world for the better and are willing to take any necessary steps to achieve this goal. We are grateful for the valuable insights provided by the professionals. These workshops have equipped us with the knowledge and skills required for effective environmental activism and policymaking. And we are committed to using this knowledge to make a positive impact on our local environment and to share our ideas with like-minded individuals across the world. Despite our status as observers, we are determined to actively participate in discussions and contribute to the development of solutions to the ecological challenges that our planet faces today. We strongly believe that every effort counts, and we are convinced that even small steps can make a huge difference.
The war inevitably affects the global warming. There are ecosystems that we have lost forever. Russian missiles, which are hitting the oil depots, hurt human health, releasing toxic substances into the environment, causing air and water pollution. The fertile lands of the country have been turned into mined military fields now. The warfare in the Ukrainian fields cause soil degradation and affects future yielding and fertility. High military activity in the Azov and Black Seas destroys marine ecosystems. Russian nuclear terrorism, occupation of Ukrainian nuclear power plants, and active warfare also causes the threat of nuclear pollution. Ukraine faces ecocide, really. And the destruction of entire ecosystems and the extinction of plants and animal species. Given these challenges, it is essential for us that Ukraine takes action to address environmental issues and prevent ecological disaster.
So, as we are going through hard times now, we would like to say a big thank you to all of you and your countries. Thank you for standing with us and believing in us. The war has been going for 9 years already, entering its full-scale phase in February 2022. But we can say from the Ukrainian side that we are grateful for your continuous support, giving us the possibility to still keep on living in our homeland. As observers in this competition, we are grateful for the opportunity to promote environmental sustainability and protection in the European Union and Ukraine. By working together, we can ensure a healthier and more sustainable future for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this presentation. Thanks again from all the futurEU team to the Observer Track for being here with us today. Now I think we have a small surprise. No, we don't have the video before. No. Yeah. No. We should have the video before. Yeah. So we have a small thank you video for to thank all of us. Right? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So it's now time to hand the People's Choice Award that you voted for today. To do that, I invite Stephanie on behalf of the Observer Track to announce the winner.
Yeah. So the winner is like the voice of people. What do you want? Woohoo! So probably everybody wants to work less, you know. So.
Thank you.
So we now have time. Where am I? Sorry. For a small break. We have 10 minutes, 5 minutes before the judges come back. So just take 5 minutes break, but be here in 5 minutes, okay? Great. Okay, is everyone seated? Yes, I think so. Okay, so the judges have deliberated, they have made their choice. But before announcing the winner, we have something to give you as a token, let's say, of our appreciation for all your hard work. So I asked the chair of the judges, who's Lucas, right? And maybe one other judge, I'll let you decide who, to help us here to hand out our small recognitions. So I'll start by calling Team 47, Federica and Iris, for their proposal on leading the climate policy advancement by including women's voices. Closing the gender gap in education is the first step for an inclusive decision-making process.
So then the second team of the semi-finalists that we are calling is Team 53. That consists of Georgia, Luca, and Simone, and their proposal, a train named Desire, how night trains could represent the future of sustainable travel in Europe.
Okay, and now it's the turn of Team 59, Luca, Fabio, and Giovanni, with their proposal, leverage public markets for sustainable growth.
Then there's Team 57, Corentin and Clémence, from Bocconi and Sciences Po, fighting fire with fire, geoengineering in the EU.
We can then proceed with Team 77, Alexia and Manon, with their proposal on air justice as social compass through climate turbulences.
And then the last team of our semi-finalists, Team 86, Thomas, Justine, and Simon, Bocconi and LSE students, next-gen agriculture, unlocking the potential of flexible state aid.
And I'd call also the observer track, so Svitlana, Solomia, Natalia, Daria, Ola, Maria, Stephanie, Anastasia, Daria, and Tata.
Okay, and once everybody has found their seat again, it is the moment we all have been waiting for. There has been some great moments today, some very interesting ideas presented by students from all over Europe, if not a lot of Italians, but here we are. And for this, and for the announcement of the winner, I would like to hand over to Lucas, who will take care of announcing the winner and informing us of what the judges have decided.
Thank you very much. maybe before we turn to the announcement you're all waiting for, let me take 1 second to thank all of the Hertie master students who put so much work into this. We're very impressed on behalf of the Jacques Delors Centre, and also we felt very well accommodated all the time through very nice emails. So thank you, Lea, Kira, Victor, Amber, Camille, Greta, and Patrick. Thank you very much. A round of applause to them, please. Let me say maybe a few words on our decision making before we announce it. So it was always very tight decisions. It was always very hard to come to a decision. We were very impressed by all of the presentations we heard. They were great throughout, and also all of the policy papers, policy proposals we have read. So congratulations to all of you. Now in the final, we heard 2 great presentations. One that was very inclusive, open, that was taking a very broad approach, a very positive approach, and that stimulated a lot of discussion about the 4-day work week. So congratulations on your presentation. And we heard a proposal that was a very thought-through policy paper, taking a very global perspective, which impressed us a lot. And that's the reason why we chose I think you're group 17, right? So you're the winners. Congratulations, and maybe you come to the front.
Congratulations. Thank you so much.
And of course, the 4-day work week, please. I hope it's a Friday, but maybe we'll still.
Thank you so much. I really can't believe it. Let me start off by saying we aren't actually Italians. I'm from Pakistan, and Francois is from France/Germany. This is an issue that was so dear to my heart, given everything. Given everything that happened in Pakistan last year with the floods, and it really showed me the need to have climate financing policies. And the fact that I live in Europe, and the fact that I've been, experiencing this wonderful continent for a while, has given me such an interesting perspective on how, it's so important for bodies like the EU, which have so much global power and so much capital, just to include other countries in the world. And I'm so happy that I got to work on this. I'm so happy that everyone, people can recognize the importance of things like this. So thank you so much for believing in our idea and for recognizing the importance of something like this, which is not something you would find often, I would say, in mainstream European media at least. Thank you.
Just
just very quickly, because I don't have a lot to add, but thank you for believing in this proposal and for letting us take a global approach on climate change and being inclusive towards other countries, which I think sometimes we forget a bit in the EU. So I'm very happy that I got to work alongside you, Iman, and benefiting so much from the perspective that you shed light on and that we shed light on today. And thank you to the jury, of course, and all the committee for the futurEU for organizing this.
And with this, and without further ado, we declare the policy competition of futurEU 2023 to be closed. But before you go...
Before we go, lots of things.
Yes. The one thing I didn't account for before stepping on stage is that I had the notes, but I will also hold a microphone while speaking, so turning the page is a difficult one. But before we part ways, we want to take a moment to express our gratitude to all of you who have been here and all of you who have been involved in making this competition happen and bringing it to life, because it really lives through the ideas that you bring to stage. So thank you for this, and I believe that deserves a big round of applause. And also a thank you to the Hertie School for having us here today and for hosting us in the forum. This has been a very nice place to be, and also to the technical help that Matt provided. He has been behind the scenes. And making this very much possible today. And a special shout out to the audience that has been joining online, especially the Italians that are watching. And with this, I give over to Greta for the last words of today.
I'm also Italian, you know, like, you shouldn't diss us too much, okay? Okay, it is finished. We have arranged a little, like, buffet for you there. So we extend an invitation to join us for a celebratory reception with us there in the back. You can stick around, mingle with the judges if they want to spend some more time with us. And we can raise a toast to the brilliant minds and bold ideas that have graced this stage today. So thank you again, and cheers to a brighter future for Europe.